The restaurant was already full when the evening lights came on. Warm yellow bulbs hung low from the ceiling, giving everything a soft glow. People filled the tables, laughing, talking, and enjoying their meals. The sound of plates, glasses, and voices mixed together into one steady noise. It was the kind of place where no one expected anything unusual to happen. Just another normal night, just another busy dinner service. Near the back of the room, close to the wall, a man sat alone at a small table. He wasn't dressed poorly, but he wasn't dressed to impress either. His shirt was clean but worn from many washes. His shoes had small scuff marks that showed he walked a lot. He kept his jacket folded neatly over the back of his chair. As if he wanted to take up as little space as possible, he looked around the room for a moment and lowered his eyes to the menu in front of him. He already knew what he was going to order. He always ordered the same thing when he came here. It was affordable, filling, and familiar. Comfort mattered more to him than choice. When the server passed by, he lifted his hand politely and placed his order in a calm, quiet voice. The server nodded, barely making eye contact, already moving on to the next table. No one meant to be rude. It was just a busy night, and he was easy to overlook. As he waited, he rested his hands on the table and listened. The sound of the restaurant wrapped around him. Somewhere nearby, a group was celebrating a birthday. A couple near the window leaned close, talking softly. From the kitchen came the sharp sound of metal on metal and the smell of cooked food drifting through the air. For a while, he simply sat there, breathing slowly, trying to stay present. But his mind didn't stay in the restaurant for long. A song played faintly through the speakers overhead. It wasn't loud, just background music meant to fill the space. Most people didn't notice it. But the moment the melody reached his ears, something inside him tightened. His fingers twitched slightly, as if they remembered something his mind tried to forget. He lowered his head a little, letting the sound pass through him. The song reminded him of a time when music wasn't just noise in the background, a time when it meant something, a time when his voice mattered. Years ago, singing had been the center of his life. Back then, he used to wake up with melodies already forming in his head. He would hum while getting dressed, sing softly while walking down the street. People used to stop and listen. Some smiled, some stayed quiet, some even clapped. Those moments used to make him feel alive. But life has a way of pulling people in different directions. Responsibilities came. Bills piled up. Promises had to be kept. There were moments when singing felt like a luxury he could no longer afford. Little by little, he stopped performing. Then he stopped practicing. Eventually, he stopped believing that his voice had a place in the world anymore. He told himself it was fine, that not everyone gets to live their dream, that some people are meant to watch from the side, while others stand in the light. Still, music never really left him, even now, sitting alone in the corner of the restaurant. His foot tapped lightly against the floor in time with the song playing overhead. He didn't notice he was doing it at first. It was instinct, like breathing. The food arrived, steaming and fresh. He thanked the server with a small smile. The server smiled back quickly before moving on. He picked up his fork and began to eat, slowly, carefully, as if he wasn't very hungry after all. Between bites, he glanced toward the small raised area near the front of the restaurant. It wasn't a stage exactly, but sometimes musicians played there on weekends. Tonight it was empty. A microphone stood unused, leaning slightly to one side. A speaker hummed quietly, waiting. He looked away quickly, as if the sight had caught him doing something wrong. He focused on his food again, but his thoughts kept drifting. His mind replayed old memories without asking permission. Dim lights. Small crowds. The feeling of standing still while the world listened. The fear before the first notes. And the calm that followed once the song began. He swallowed hard and took a slow breath. Around him, life continued as normal. A chair scraped against the floor. Someone laughed loudly. A glass tipped over and spilled water, followed by quick apologies. No one noticed the man in the corner fighting a quiet battle. Inside himself, he wasn't here to be seen. He came to this restaurant because it felt safe. No expectations. No pressure. Just food and noise and people who didn't know him. He could sit here and be invisible. Sometimes that felt easier than being known. But tonight felt different, though he couldn't explain why. The background music changed to another song. This one was older, slower, the kind of song that carried emotion in every line. His chest felt tight again. He set his fork down and rested his hands in his lap. Pressing his fingers together as if trying to hold himself still, a memory surfaced, clear and sharp. Standing in a small room singing to a handful of people who believed in him, someone telling him he had something special. Someone promising to help him take the next step. Promises don't always last. He pushed the thought away and took another bite. But the food tasted different now. Less comforting, more distant. He glanced at his phone on the table. No new messages. No missed calls. That wasn't surprising. He hadn't told anyone he was coming here. He rarely told anyone where he went anymore. Across the room, the musician who had been scheduled for the night was speaking quietly with the manager. Their faces looked tense. The musicians shook their head, clearly upset. After a moment, they picked up their bag and walked toward the exit. A few people noticed. A few whispered. Most didn't care. The manager sighed and rubbed their forehead, then looked at the empty microphone again. The man in the corner watched the scene without realizing he was holding his breath. He told himself it wasn't his business, that he should finish his meal, pay the bill, and go home like always. That stepping forward only led to disappointment. But the music inside him, quiet for so long, stirred again. His heart beat faster, not with excitement, but with fear. Real fear. The kind that comes when something you buried starts knocking at the door. He sat there, torn between staying invisible and being heard, not knowing that this ordinary night was slowly moving toward a moment that would change everything. And for the first time in a long while, he wondered what would happen if he didn't stay quiet. The man stayed seated for a long moment after seeing the musician leave. The door closed softly behind them, but the feeling it left behind was heavy. The empty microphone near the front of the restaurant seemed more noticeable now, like a quiet question hanging in the air. No one announced anything. No one explained. The restaurant simply kept moving, as if nothing had changed. He looked down at his plate. The food was still warm, but he had lost his appetite. He pushed the plate slightly away and leaned back in his chair. His chest felt tight and his breathing was shallow. He tried to tell himself to relax. This was not his problem. He was just a customer, nothing more. Still, his eyes kept drifting toward the front. The manager spoke briefly with one of the servers. The server nodded and walked away, looking unsure. A few minutes passed, and the background music stopped completely. The sudden silence felt strange. Conversations continued, but they sounded louder without the music beneath them. Someone near the bar complained quietly. Another person laughed it off. Most people didn't seem to care whether there was live music or not. They were here to eat, to talk, to forget about their own long days. The man told himself to finish his meal and leave, but his body didn't listen. His hands rested on his knees, fingers pressing and releasing again and again. His foot tapped against the floor faster now. His thoughts raced, jumping between memories and doubts. He remembered standing in front of crowds, remembered the way his voice used to fill a room. He also remembered the disappointment that came later, the closed doors, the calls that never came back. He swallowed hard. What if he stood up? The idea scared him more than he expected, not because of the people watching, but because of what it might awaken inside him. Hope had hurt him before. Hope had promised things it never delivered. He glanced around. No one was looking at him. He was still invisible. Still safe. Across the room, the manager walked toward the microphone, adjusted it, then stopped. They looked around, clearly unsure what to do next. After a brief pause, they spoke quietly to the server again. The server looked toward the tables, scanning the room. Their eyes passed over him once. Then again, for a split second, their gaze lingered. He looked away quickly, his heart pounding. He felt exposed, as if the server could somehow hear his thoughts. The server moved on, but the moment stayed with him. He took a deep breath and reminded himself that no one knew who he was. No one knew what he had left behind. The server approached a few tables, asking politely if anyone wanted to sing or play something. Most people laughed and shook their heads. A couple joked about it. One person raised their glass and said they'd rather listen than perform. The server smiled politely each time. Though the disappointment was clear, when the server reached his table, they paused. He looked up. Their smile was gentle, not forced. "We had a small issue with the music tonight," the server said quietly. "If you know anyone who might want to sing, just let us know." He nodded slowly. "Okay," he said. "That was all." The server moved on. He let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. His hands were shaking now, just a little. He pressed them together and rested them on the table. This was ridiculous, he told himself. He wasn't here to perform. He was here to eat and go home. That was it. But the silence at the front of the room stretched on. The microphone remained unused. The restaurant felt slightly off. It's like a story waiting for its next line. Someone at a nearby table began humming absent-mindedly, then stopped. Another person checked their phone, then looked up again. People were starting to notice the empty space. The man closed his eyes for a moment. He remembered the first. His knees had shaken just like this. His hands had felt just as unsteady. But once he started, something else had taken over. Something calm and sure. He wondered if that part of him was still there. He opened his eyes and looked at the microphone again. The stand was slightly crooked. The cable lay coiled on the floor, worn from use. It didn't look grand or glamorous. It looked real, ordinary, just like him. He stood up slowly, almost without deciding to. His chair made a soft sound as it slid back. He froze, expecting people to turn and stare. No one did. He took one step forward, then another. Each step felt heavier than the last. His legs wanted to turn back. His mind screamed at him to sit down, to stop embarrassing himself. He paused halfway across the room. His heart pounded so loudly he was sure others could hear it. He considered turning around, pretending he was just going to the restroom. No one would question it. He could still escape. Then the background noise faded. It's just a little. Someone noticed him walking toward the front. Then another. A few conversations softened. A few heads turned. Not with interest yet, just curiosity. The manager noticed him and stepped forward. "Can I help you?" they asked, keeping their voice low. He cleared his throat. His voice sounded smaller than he wanted it to. "I was wondering," he said, then stopped. The words felt stuck. The manager waited. "I was wondering if I could sing one song," he finished. The manager studied him for a brief moment. Not judging, just deciding. Then they nodded. "If you'd like," they said. Just one song. Relief and fear washed over him at the same time. The manager stepped aside and gestured toward the microphone. He walked the rest of the way on legs that felt like they didn't belong to him. As he reached the stand, he hesitated. He hadn't stood this close to a microphone in years. It felt familiar and strange all at once. He adjusted it slightly, then stopped, unsure if he was doing it right. His hands trembled. The room wasn't quiet yet, but it was changing. People were noticing. Some looked interested. Some looked amused. Some looked doubtful. He took another deep breath. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't explain. He simply closed his eyes for a second and listened to the silence beneath the noise. When he opened them again, the restaurant felt smaller. More focused, he leaned toward the microphone. His mouth opened. No sound came out. A flicker of doubt crossed his face. He swallowed, stepped back, then leaned in again. This time, he let the sound come naturally, without forcing it. The first note was soft, almost fragile. A few people continued talking. Then he sang the second line. Something in his voice shifted. It grew steadier, warmer. The words carried weight, not because they were loud, but because they were honest. A nearby table fell quiet. Another followed. Forks paused. Glasses were set down. He kept singing, each note pulled. Something from deep inside him, regret, hope, pain, love. He didn't think about technique or perfection. He sang the way he used to, It was just about feeling. The restaurant grew quieter with every line. People leaned forward in their seats. Some looked at each other, surprised. Others stared at him, unable to look away. He felt it now. That calm, that steady place inside him that he thought was gone by the time he reached the middle of the song. The restaurant had changed completely. The noise was gone. Only his voice remained. The room felt different now. It wasn't just quieter. It was focused. Every sound that used to fill the space had faded into the background. The clink of plates, the low talk, the laughter, all of it seemed far away. His voice had become the center of the room, steady and warm, moving through the air like it belonged there. He stood still, holding the microphone gently, not gripping it too tight. His shoulders relaxed as the song carried him forward. Each word came out clear, shaped by years of feeling rather than practice. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was simply telling the truth the only way he knew how. A woman near the front stopped chewing mid-bite. She slowly set her fork down and rested her hands on the table. Her eyes stayed on him, unblinking. Across the room, a man leaned back in his chair. Arms crossed at first, and slowly uncrossed them as if he needed to breathe easier. Someone near the window wiped their eyes quickly, hoping no one noticed. He didn't notice any of this at first. He was somewhere else, somewhere between memory and now. The song pulled images from his past without warning. Long nights singing to empty rooms, early mornings filled with doubt. The look on someone's face when they told him it wasn't enough. His voice wavered for just a second. He felt it. The fear tried to return, whispering that he should stop before he fell apart in front of strangers. His chest tightened and his breath caught. Then he heard something unexpected. Silence, not the awkward kind. Not the kind filled with judgment. It was deep and respectful, like the room itself was listening. He took a breath and continued. The next line came out stronger. His voice filled the space with confidence he didn't know he still had. It surprised him as much as anyone else. He felt his feet steady against the floor. He lifted his head slightly, no longer afraid to be seen. The song told a story of longing and loss, of standing still while life rushed by. It spoke of dreams set aside, of promises broken not by people, but by time. The words were simple. The feeling behind them was heavy and real. People felt it because they recognized it. A young server stood frozen near the kitchen entrance. Tray in hand, completely forgetting their task. The manager leaned against the wall, arms folded, eyes fixed on the man singing. They hadn't expected this. No one had. A child at one table whispered something to their parent. The parent gently placed a finger over the child's lips, smiling softly, asking for quiet without saying a word. He reached the part of the song that always scared him the most. The part where the voice had to rise, not in volume, but in honesty. The part where there was no place to hide. His hands trembled again, just slightly. He remembered the last time he had sung this song. It had been years ago, in a small room with poor lighting and high hopes. He remembered walking off the stage that night thinking everything would change. It hadn't. That memory burned in his chest. For a moment, his voice softened, almost breaking. Someone in the crowd leaned forward, as if silently asking him not to stop. He closed his eyes. Instead of pushing the feeling away, he let it in. He let the disappointment, the hurt, the quiet years speak through him. The sound that came out was raw, imperfect, and full of life. That was when the restaurant went completely quiet. No movement. No whispers. Even the kitchen sounds faded, as if the people behind the doors had paused too. The silence wasn't empty. It was full. His voice floated through it, carrying every unspoken word he had held inside for so long. He felt lighter as the song went on. Like each note lifted something heavy off his shoulders. His breathing slowed. His fear melted away, replaced by a calm certainty that this moment mattered, even if it led nowhere else. He was no longer singing for approval. He was singing because he needed to. At one table, an older couple held hands. They had stopped looking at him and were looking at each other instead, sharing something private the song had stirred. At another table, a person stared down at their plate, lost in thought, remembering something they hadn't thought about in years. The room had become a shared space of feeling as he approached the final lines. He felt the weight of the moment settle in his chest. He didn't rush it. He let each word land where it needed to. His voice softened again, gentle and controlled, like a conversation between old friends. He opened his eyes and looked out at the room for the first time since he started singing. Every face was turned toward him. Some were smiling softly. Some looked serious. Some were openly emotional. No one was bored. No one was distracted. He realized then that they weren't just listening to a song, they were listening to him. That realization shook him more than the fear ever had. He reached the last note and held it, just long enough to let it breathe. Then he let it fade naturally, trusting the silence to catch it. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. The quiet stayed. He lowered the microphone slowly, unsure what to do next. His heart pounded again, this time with uncertainty. Had he gone too far? Had he made people uncomfortable? Then someone started clapping. It was hesitant at first. Just one pair of hands, then another. Then the sound spread across the room like a wave breaking free. Applause filled the space, loud and sincere. People stood. Some whistled softly. Others simply clapped with smiles that reached their eyes. He stood there, frozen. Overwhelmed, he hadn't expected this. He hadn't expected anything. The manager stepped forward, smiling openly now, and nodded at him with respect. The servers joined in the applause, some still holding trays, some wiping their hands on their aprons just so they could clap too. His throat tightened. He gave a small nod in return, not trusting his voice to speak, as the applause slowly faded. The restaurant didn't return to its old noise right away. There was a softness in the air now, shared understanding that something meaningful had just happened. He stepped back from the microphone and started to walk toward his table, unsure if he should stay or leave. His legs felt weak, but his steps were steady. A few people reached out as he passed, touching his arm gently, offering quiet words of thanks. He smiled, nodded, but didn't stop. When he reached his chair, he sat down slowly and exhaled. His hands were still shaking, but his heart felt calm. He looked down at the table where his plate sat untouched. For the first time in a long while, he felt full without eating. He didn't know what would happen next. He didn't know if this moment would change his life or simply live on as a memory. But he knew one thing for certain: he had finally been heard. The applause slowly settled, but the feeling stayed. It hung in the air like warmth after a long winter day. People didn't rush back to their conversations right away. Some remained standing. Others sat quietly, as if afraid to break the moment by speaking too soon. He stayed in his chair, hands resting on the table, breathing in and out until his heartbeat slowed. The shaking in his fingers faded, replaced by a tired calm. It felt like he had run a long distance without moving his feet. A server approached his table, moving carefully, almost respectfully. "Would you like anything?" they asked softly. He looked up and smiled. "Just some water, please," he said. The server nodded and returned a moment later with a glass filled to the top. They placed it down gently, then hesitated. "Thank you," they added, their voice sincere. Before walking away, he wrapped his hands around the glass, feeling the coolness against his palms. He took a slow sip. The water grounded him, pulled him fully back into the room. Across the restaurant, people were whispering now. Not loud, excited talk, but soft conversations filled with wonder. Some pointed toward him without being obvious. Others simply watched him from a distance, curiosity written on their faces. He wasn't used to this kind of attention. The manager approached, stopping a few steps away, giving him space. "That was something special," they said. "You didn't have to do that, but I'm glad you did." He nodded. "Thank you for letting me," he replied. The manager smiled. "If you ever want to come back and sing again, the door's open." The words landed gently but deeply. He didn't answer right away. He just nodded again, not trusting himself to say more. The manager moved on, returning to their work, but they walked a little lighter now. A few minutes passed. People slowly returned to their meals, but the energy had changed. Laughter sounded softer. Conversations felt closer. It was as if the room had taken a shared breath together. He looked down at his phone again. Still no messages. Still quiet. And yet he didn't feel alone. Someone stopped by his table. A man around his age, wearing a simple jacket, hands tucked into his pockets. "I didn't expect that tonight," the man said. "But I needed it. So, thanks." He smiled and nodded. "I'm glad," he said. The man hesitated, then added, "You should keep singing." With that, he walked away. Those words stayed. Another person came by later, a woman with kind eyes. She didn't say much. She just placed a small note on the table and smiled before returning to her seat. When he opened it later, it read, "Keep going. Don't stop." He folded the note carefully and slipped it into his pocket. For the first time in years, the idea of singing again didn't feel painful. It felt possible. He finished his water and finally took a few bites of his food. It tasted better now, familiar again. He paid the bill and stood up, slipping his jacket on slowly, not quite ready to leave. As he headed toward the door, the staff nodded at him as he passed. One server gave him a quiet thumbs up. Another smiled wide, unable to hide their excitement. Outside, the night air was cool and still. The streetlights cast long shadows on the sidewalk. He took a deep breath, filling his lungs. Letting the night settle around him, he walked a short distance and stopped. For years, he had gone straight home after dinner. Same route, same pace, same thoughts. Tonight, his feet carried him somewhere else without asking permission. He found himself walking past closed shops, past quiet streets, until he reached a small park. The benches were empty. The world felt calm, like it was giving him room to think. He sat down and stared ahead, replaying the night in his mind. Not the applause, but the silence. That deep listening silence. The kind he hadn't felt in a long time. He realized something then. He hadn't failed. Because he stopped singing. He stopped singing because life got heavy. And he never gave himself permission to come back. The thought made his chest ache, but not in a painful way. It felt honest. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through old recordings, ones he hadn't listened to in years. His younger voice filled his ears, full of hope and uncertainty. He listened without judgment, just curiosity. There was still something there. He didn't make any big promises to himself. He didn't plan a comeback or dream about stages and crowds. He just opened a note on his phone and typed a simple reminder: sing again the next day. Came quietly. He woke up feeling tired but lighter. The world hadn't changed overnight. He still had responsibilities, still had bills, still had a life that needed attention, but something inside him had shifted. He hummed while making breakfast, surprising himself. The sound came easily. He didn't stop it. Later that day, while walking to work, he noticed music playing from a nearby window. Normally, he would have kept walking. This time, he slowed down. He listened. He smiled. That evening, he returned to the restaurant. Not to sing, just to sit. The staff recognized him immediately. Someone waved. The manager nodded from across the room. He took his usual seat near the back and ordered the same meal. The microphone stood at the front again, empty. He didn't feel pulled toward it the same way. Not yet. And that was okay. During dinner, a server stopped by and asked quietly, "Would you like to sing tonight?" He thought for a moment. "Not tonight," he said, smiling. "But maybe soon." The server smiled back. "We'll be ready." He finished his meal, feeling at peace. When he left, he walked home slowly, taking a longer route. He watched people. He listened to the city's sounds. He felt present. Days passed. He began singing softly at home. Just a few minutes at first, then longer. He didn't worry about perfection. He sang to remember how it felt. One evening, he received a message from an unknown number. It was short. "Someone at the restaurant shared your singing. Would you be open to talking?" He stared at the screen for a long time, Fear tried to return. But it didn't have the same power anymore, he typed back. Yes. He set the phone down and exhaled. Whatever came next. He knew one thing. He wasn't invisible anymore, and he didn't want to be. The days that followed moved at a steady pace, but they didn't feel the same anymore. He noticed small changes in himself first. He woke up earlier without forcing it. He walked with his shoulders a little less tense. When music played nearby, he didn't rush away from it. He listened. The message on his phone stayed there, unread after that first reply, like a quiet promise, waiting for the right moment. He didn't rush to call back. He didn't tell anyone. He wanted to make sure this feeling was real before he shared it with the world. At home, he sang. Not loudly. Not to impress. Just enough to feel the sound move through him. Sometimes he sang while washing dishes. Sometimes while sitting on the edge of his bed after a long day. His voice wasn't perfect. It cracked now and then, but it was honest, and that mattered more. One evening, he returned to the park where he had sat after the night at the restaurant. The bench was empty again. He sat down and looked around, letting the quiet settle. He sang a few lines under his breath, careful not to disturb anyone. The sound felt right, like it belonged to the place. A passerby slowed their steps, listened for a moment, then smiled and walked on. That small reaction stayed with him longer than he expected. A few days later, he replied to the message again and agreed to meet for coffee. The place was simple. No big talk. No promises made. Just a conversation about music, about life, about timing. He spoke honestly, without trying to sell himself or sound confident. He said he had stepped away for a long time. He said he was finding his way back. The person across the table listened. They didn't rush him. They didn't push. They just nodded and said, "When you're ready, there's space for you." That was enough. He left the cafe feeling steady. Not excited in a way that made his chest race, but calm, like he had placed his feet back on solid ground. Weeks passed. He kept going to the restaurant. Sometimes to sing, sometimes just to listen. Each time he sang, the fear was a little quieter. Each time he didn't, the music still stayed with him. The staff greeted him like an old friend. Regulars began to expect the unexpected when he stood near the microphone. He never announced himself. He never explained his past. He just sang. People came up to him after, sharing pieces of their own stories. Lost chances. Paused dreams. Quiet hopes. He listened more than he spoke. He understood now that his voice didn't just carry a song. It carried permission. One night, after he finished singing, the room stayed quiet again. Not because people were shocked, but because they didn't want the moment to end. When the applause came, it felt gentle, grateful. As he walked back to his table, he felt something settle inside him. This wasn't about being seen by everyone. It was about being true to himself. Later that night, as he stepped outside, he looked up at the sky. The city sounds hummed around him. Cars passed. People laughed somewhere nearby. Life kept moving, just as it always had. But he wasn't standing still anymore. He took out his phone and opened the note he had written weeks earlier. "Sing again." He added a few more words beneath it. Keep going. He didn't know where the path would lead. He didn't need to. He had learned something important. Dreams don't disappear when you stop chasing them. They wait. Sometimes they wait quietly, patiently, until you're ready to listen again. On another evening. Months later, the restaurant was full once more. New faces. New voices. The same warm lights. He stood near the microphone, feeling familiar nerves, but also comfort. He looked around the room and smiled softly when he began to sing. The restaurant went quiet again, not because they were surprised this time, but because they wanted to hear every word. And as his voice filled the room, he knew something deep and simple. He had found his way, back not to fame, not to applause, but to himself. Life did not suddenly turn into something big and loud after that. There were no headlines, no crowds waiting outside the restaurant, and he was grateful for that. The change that mattered most was the one no one could see from the outside. He began to trust himself again, each morning. He woke with a simple plan. Go to work, do what needed to be done, sing when he could, rest when he needed to. He stopped rushing through his days like he was trying to escape them. Instead, he let them unfold. Music became part of his routine, not something special, saved for rare moments. He sang while cleaning his small apartment. He sang quietly while waiting for the bus. Sometimes he didn't even realize he was doing it until someone nearby smiled at the restaurant.
Ow.
The staff stopped seeing him as the man who surprised everyone that one night. He became something steadier than that. He became familiar. Someone who belonged. Some evenings, he sang 2 songs. Other nights, just 1. There were nights he didn't sing at all. No one pressured him. That freedom made all the difference. One slow evening, the restaurant was half full. Rain tapped softly against the windows. The lights felt warmer than usual. He stood near the microphone, waiting for the right moment before he could step forward. Someone else did. A young person, nervous and unsure, asked quietly if they could sing. Their hands shook even more than his had that first night. The manager looked around, then nodded. He watched from his seat as the young person sang. The voice was unpolished, but full of heart. A few notes missed their mark, but the effort was brave. When the song ended, the applause was kind. The young person stepped away from the microphone. Cheeks flushed, eyes bright, he clapped the loudest. Later, when the young person passed by his table, he smiled and said, "You did great." The words seemed to mean more than he expected. That night, as he walked home, he realized something. It's important. His story wasn't just about finding his voice again. It was about making space for others to find theirs. Days later, he received another message. This one wasn't about opportunities or meetings. It was from someone who had been at the restaurant one night. "Your singing helped me do something I was scared to do. Thank you." He stared at the message for a long time. He replied with a simple sentence, "I'm glad you were there." He didn't save the message. He didn't screenshot it. He let it live in the moment, just like the song had. As weeks turned into months, his confidence grew in quiet ways. He started writing again. Not full songs at first. Just lines, thoughts, feelings he hadn't put into words before. Some nights, he sat by his window with a notebook, listening to the city breathe. Letting words come when they wanted to. He wasn't chasing anything. He was building something. One evening, the manager approached him with a question. "We've been thinking," they said. "Would you be open to helping with a small open mic night here? Nothing big, just a place where people can try." The idea surprised him. He thought about it carefully. "Yes," he said. "I'd like that." The first open mic night was simple. No posters, no announcements, just word of mouth. A few people showed up. Some sang, some read poetry, some just listened. He didn't perform that night. He stood near the back, watching faces soften, watching fear turn into relief. When the night ended, the room felt full in a way that had nothing to do with numbers. After that, the open mic nights became a quiet tradition. Once a week, same time, same space. Different stories he sang sometimes. Other times, he didn't. It no longer mattered. What mattered was that he had stopped hiding. One late evening, long after the restaurant had closed, he stayed behind to help clean up. Chairs were stacked. Lights were dimmed. The room felt peaceful. He stood by the microphone one last time before leaving. He sang softly. Just for himself, the sound filled the empty room. Gentle and unafraid. He smiled. He knew now that he didn't need a perfect moment to sing. Any moment could be enough. As he stepped outside and locked the door behind him, he felt the cool night air on his face. He looked back at the restaurant, its windows dark now. Holding so many shared moments inside, he walked away slowly, hands in his pockets. Heart steady. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but he knew who he was. And for the first time in a very long while, that was more than enough. Time continued to move forward, gentle and steady, like a song that no longer rushed toward the ending. The restaurant changed with the seasons. In summer, the doors stayed open longer, letting warm air and street sounds drift inside. In winter, people gathered closer, holding hot drinks and quiet conversations. Through it all, the small stage remained. So did he. He was no longer the man hiding in the corner, but he was not a performer chasing attention either. He existed somewhere in between, a familiar presence, a steady voice, someone people trusted to be real. The open mic nights grew slowly. Never loud, never crowded, just enough people to fill the room with courage. New faces came. Some returned again and again. Others showed up once, sang their heart out, and never came back. All of it felt right. He learned to listen in a new way. When someone stood at the microphone, nervous and unsure, he watched their shoulders. He remembered how heavy that fear felt. He smiled when they took their first breath. He clapped, even when the room hesitated. Especially then. One evening a person stood up and froze. The room went silent, not in expectation, but concern. The person tried to speak, then stopped. Their eyes filled with tears. Without thinking, he stepped forward. He didn't take the microphone. He didn't sing. He just stood beside them and said quietly, "You don't have to rush. We're here." The person nodded, took a breath, and tried again. Later that night, as the room emptied, the manager thanked him. "You've changed this place," they said. He shook his head. "It changed me first." Outside, the street was quiet. He walked home slowly, hands loose at his sides. He thought about how different his life felt now. Not easier. Not perfect. Just honest, he still had bad days. Days when doubt returned without warning. Days when his voice felt tired. On those days, he didn't force anything. He rested. He trusted that the song would return when it was ready. One morning, while cleaning out a drawer, he found an old notebook. Inside were lyrics from years ago, some unfinished, some hopeful, some angry. He read them without judgment. He picked up a pen. This time, he didn't write for an audience. He wrote for himself. Lines came slowly, then faster. Words shaped by everything he had lived through. He didn't know if they would ever be sung out loud. That wasn't the point. The point was that he was no longer afraid of his own voice. Months later, the restaurant held a small celebration. Not for him, but for the community that had grown there. People shared food, stories, laughter. The microphone stayed off for most of the night, near the end. Someone called out, asking him to sing. He hesitated, then smiled. He stepped forward, adjusted the microphone, and took a breath. The song he chose was simple, one he had written himself. It spoke of quiet courage, of waiting, of finding light in ordinary places as he sang. The room listened the way it always had. With care, when the song ended, there was applause, but it felt secondary. What mattered more was the stillness that followed. The shared understanding later that night, as he cleaned up, he noticed the small note still tucked in his pocket. The one that said, "Keep going. Don't stop." He smiled. He thought back to the man he used to be. The one who believed his moment had passed. The one who sat quietly in the corner, afraid to be seen. He wished he could tell him something simple. It's not too late. As he locked up and stepped into the night, the air felt cool and familiar. He walked home without rushing, humming softly under his breath. Life hadn't given him everything he'd once dreamed of, but it had given him something better. A voice, a place, and the courage to keep showing up. And that, he knew, was more than enough.